Recording. All right, folks, so welcome back. We are continuing to dive through The Circle Maker by Mark Batterson. So last time we talked about kind of the intro and had a really good discussion, and we're sharing with you guys how pleasantly surprised we are to be diving into this book. And so we are moving forward with part one, and that's what we're going to be talking about this week.
Yeah, and part one is the first circle, and it's called The Big Dream. And so in part one, that's what we're going to dive into today.
So I think that one of the biggest things about this book, we talked a little bit last week about the fact that we started off with a very different book. Mm-hmm. And I kind of was holding my breath through the intro and now through the first circle, kind of saying, okay, is it going to get too lofty? Is it going to get too far-fetched? And I found myself in jeopardy of like highlighting the entire page.
Everything was so good. So good. I had to rotate between highlighting with a highlighter and highlighting with pen because I was like, everything is just like going to be in color. So
yes, exactly. I ended up like actually going through the barrel of a highlighter because it was just so good in terms of, or has been so good thus far about how he really is breaking down this concept of praying circles around the things that God is revealing to you or asking that you're asking God of, and kind of really also breaking down the difference of praying for things and praying through things. Mm-hmm. So I think when we talked last week, we really kind of were getting the idea and getting a sense of, what is it, even knowing and knowing how to better pray to God to demonstrate what his will for you is. You have to figure out like what it is that you're asking for. What is success to you? What does it mean for God to answer a prayer for you? Like, what does that look like? And know what you're praying for first.
Yeah. And we recognize that, it's going to take, we're definitely embarking on this process and it's going to take us a little while to narrow down our things. But I love that this book is so practical and it makes this idea real. Like in the first chapter, part one starts on chapter 5. One of the first things I highlighted was drawing prayer circles often looks like an exercise in foolishness, but that's faith. Faith is the willingness to look foolish. Yeah. And that like what I just love the practicality because like we want to be real, like the same way with this platform, the same way we're talking about prayer, like we don't want real here. And sometimes the prayers we're praying look crazy to other people.
Right.
That really already shook me right there. Like, you have to be willing to let go of the idea that your prayer is too big or foolish for God to even embark on this process.
Exactly. And I think sometimes one of the things that I've struggled with is, like you said, this idea of not being transparent, not being real when we talk about what this relationship with God looks like. So oftentimes, people, I prayed these big prayers and I just knew that God was going to move. And it's like, that's funny. Like, I don't have the same experience. Sometimes
I wasn't really sure if he was going to do it, to be honest with you. Exactly.
And it's like, okay, I'd love to get to that level of agreement and faith. But oftentimes I am praying to God because I know what he's capable of, not necessarily what I deserve. Mm-hmm. And so I think the growth in praying these circles is kind of being able to say that if you, and one of the other kind of things that he mentioned that I loved, it's like, if you focus on the footnote, God will write the headline. Like, so sometimes I'm so focused on what I'm actually doing. And I'm like, oh, shucks, maybe I should be, thinking bigger. And it's like, no, if you focus on doing the work, God will, kind of work on the big message. But that does not absolve us from the responsibility of, as we grow in our faith, our dreams and what we pray to God around should grow too.
Yeah, and he talks about the idea like you got to be willing to take the risk. And I think like sometimes that's what we don't want. And one particular a phrase that I underlined, and then I wrote a note on there, and it says, it's talking about Moses, and it says he's trying to think of a conceivable way that God could fulfill this promise, and he can't think of a single scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And that's often with us, is like, we only pray what we think God can do.
Right.
And we have to, and I wrote in my own notes, stop trying to figure it out. If you have the big dream or the big vision or the risk that you want to take, the ways that we think that God could solve it and do it are not God's ways.
Mm-hmm.
So stop trying to think about that. You know, take the risk and pray and see what happens.
Right. It's about things not adding up. Mm-hmm. And I think we have, you know, talked a lot about the fact that you and I are both very logical people.
Yes.
Like, budget, we plan.
Yep.
Stuff got to make sense.
Plan. Okay. Yeah. Yes.
If it don't make sense, it don't make dollars. So like, it needs to add up. And oftentimes what's crazy is reflecting as I'm reading this book is the things that God does and way he moves don't make sense.
Exactly.
Like, thinking very practical, even right now, like there are things that are happening right now that that are happening without me having time for, without me investing in, and they are growing and flourishing like a succulent in the desert. Like,
in this particular part, he talks a lot about multiplying.
Yes.
God will multiply. If we put what little we have into God's hands, he will multiply. And it's like, to us, he's an example, 5 plus 2 is 7. But to God, 5 plus 2 could be 5,000. You don't know. And so, like, go ahead and take the risk. And also, like, because you don't know. You just don't know.
Right. The other part that I thought was super salient, that I felt like I highlighted and underlined in this part, is that, you know, one of the things, so he was talking about in the example that you just gave, where Jesus kind of took the fish and the loaves and multiplied it, right? And he notes that one of the other things that Jesus did before the miracle was give thanks. He thanked God for what he had already done, like in past tense, not like, you know, I will thank you, or I will be so appreciative if you did this. He thanked God before the miracle happened, and as though the miracle had already happened. And I think that was so profound around, like, as we continue to pray circles around the things that are important to us, that we are asking God to move on our behalf around, we need to, at some point, thank him for it as though it's already been done, trusting that he will do it.
Yeah, and I think what goes along right with that is letting go of the how. And again, going back to how practical we are, how we want to have plan A, B, and C. Like, we're not really trying to think about X, Y, and Z, but like, we got to let go of the how. It says too often we let the how get in the way of what God wants us to do. And I know I'm so guilty of this. Because I'm like, oh God, I feel you calling me to do this, but like, that's because that's too much energy. I don't have time for that. I don't have money for that. Like, we get too caught up in the how instead of focusing on the what. And I know that's one thing that this section has challenged me to do.
Right. Where if you are hearing God say move, that means that he is providing provision. Like, you know, that he will give provision in that direction. And I think that's one of the things that I reflect on, as far as like being able to recognize God's voice, is saying, like, this won't be able to be done in my own strength.
Exactly. And to speak to that point, which is another reason why I think this book is really real, he says, I learned that if you aren't willing to put yourself in this is crazy situations, you'll never experience this is awesome moments.
Right.
Because so many of the things we think about doing, they're crazy. So crazy. But like, that's how you get to the miracles. That's how you get to seeing God's hand, is like, you know, it all starts with, you know, this is crazy.
It's crazy.
But I think God wants me to do it. So like, I feel that. And that's how you get to the miracles and the awesome moments.
Right. Yeah, I think about stepping out on, I think there's a pastor, Mike Todd, who talks about, who had a series at the beginning of the year, like Crazy Faith.
Mhm.
and stepping out on that level of faith that other people won't understand or recognize, even people sometimes who are closest to you and you may not even really recognize. But then having this comfort and reassurance that as you are moving, it's almost like um, you're stepping out and you can't see the brick ahead until you take the step.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and the, path almost kind of creates itself as you step. It's not there
Mhm.
because oftentimes it's going to be a path never traveled by people, that we know or who are close to us, but it is going to be the path that God has called us to. And so it is going to be created as we take every step.
Yeah, I like that. And that's exactly what God does. It's like the steps are being built as you walk on them. And that, again, is why it's the importance of letting go of the how. And I think as as I've gotten older, that's what I've started to get better at, is letting go of, like, I don't know the how, but like God is going to help me figure this out. And it may literally be the hour before I need him to figure it out. But like you said, you take the step, the rock or the path comes up. And so I think like that's a word right there.
Right.
That is a word.
And I think about how God is giving to us or will give to us in so many ways that we might not, like you said, ever be able to really imagine or foresee.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it is, God asking for us to give what we have. And like you said before, multiply it. And so I appreciated his reference to Luke 6:38, where it says, give and it will be given to you, a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be poured into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. And so I think about not just giving of, kind of time, talent. I think oftentimes in religious settings, that verse is oftentimes referenced to tithing and giving financially. But I think I have seen a number of ways in which I've given of my talent.
Yeah.
And God has opened doors that I would never expect, where I haven't been able to maybe give as much financially, being a grad student or a early career professional. But God is like, you're willing to give things that I've given to you. And even just the fraction that you're willing to sacrifice, I will double and triple and allow for more.
Yeah, yeah. And he talks a lot about how Jesus taught in multiplication, and God is God of multiplying, and how that's so important. Something that was really interesting to me, and I'd love to hear what you thought about it, was um, he says one of the things we often talk about is like we pray for God's will.
Yes.
Like, Lord, if it's your will. And he said, if you aren't careful, the will of God will become a cop out if things don't turn out how you want. And he talks about how he prayed for, I think, to sell like 25,000 copies of his book. But he was like, what I really wanted to pray for was like 100,000 or something way more than that. But he was like, I said at the end, if it's your will. And that struck me because sometimes I do that. And I didn't think of it as a cop out. I thought of it as like, this is what I want, but I want God's will. But it's also like, no, if you're praying boldly, then pray boldly. Don't like, do you think God can do it or not?
Yes. Yes, I agree. I felt seen. I was like, okay, Mark. I do that all the time. And I think also in like learning more about God's will, initially it was like, oh, okay, I should definitely want God's will. And so I initially started using it as like, I shouldn't just pray for what I want, but I should pray for God's will. And then, like you said, as God started to move, it kind of was like, huh, okay, God, you're really moving. And I only want to, kind of move in this direction or ask for this if it's in your will. And like you said, very timidly, almost kind of saying that way, if God decides that it's a no, I won't be utterly devastated and I won't attribute it. I think the way that I think about it is like, I won't attribute God saying no to my unworthiness. I'll be able to attribute it to his will. And one of the things that I'm really like focused on is kind of trying to get out of this mindset that just because God doesn't do, doesn't mean that he won't, one, and two, doesn't mean that it has anything to do with my level of worthiness.
Yes.
Because, you know, in reality, we're all unworthy. Mm-hmm. Right?
And in reality, we're all qualified because Jesus died on the cross for us. So no matter what we've done, we can still come to the throne and do it. And I think thinking about this, it really pushed me. Like sometimes when I say, you know, your will, let your, you know, if it's your will, I'm scared to take the risk. And I think like, or, you know, we're scared to like, you know, do we want to be the one that's like, yeah, we're at the ocean, I'm gonna lift this up and it's gonna part. Like, do we want to share those with other people? Do we want to not look crazy? So we throw in like, you know, if it's your will, just in case it doesn't happen. And I think like for me, like just being comfortable with, if God put this in my heart, I'm gonna pray it, and I'm gonna believe for it, and you know, and see what God will do.
Right. And I think with that, you know, not only seeing what God will do, but he also makes a point, I think, as we move into chapter 6, which I think is so funny in terms of like the Southern saying, like, you can't never always sometimes tell. It's like, you know, like
that's a whole word right there.
Right.
I could, but you never know.
Like anything really could happen. God is capable of anything. But one of the things that he talks about is something that I always have to remind myself of, is that God's no, what I hear as no could be not right now. Mm-hmm. And that there may be things not only that God is doing in other places, that God is still doing in me, that God is trying to position me for, to make answering what I'm asking for make sense for him. Mm-hmm. It doesn't need to make sense for me, but it needs to be in line and accordance with what God is doing.
Yeah, and it says, he talks about in that chapter, like God is gonna give us a vision beyond our resources, because God he has unlimited provision. And so if we just trust in the one that gave us the vision, everything is gonna work out. And it's like it says, he said, you feel like you're setting yourself up for failure, but you're actually setting God up for a miracle. And to your point in one of our other videos, you said, like, is God gonna get the glory? If we could do it, you know, God ain't gonna get the glory from that. So it has to be a bump up,
right,
beyond what we could do, beyond what we could even think of, right. In order for it to happen, so God can get the glory.
Exactly. And I think anytime that we try to do it out of God's timing, we can see that it never really works out. Mm-hmm. Like that it never really manifests in the way that it could. And so I think that's the part that's tricky. Like some people find maybe their level of success or society's level of success, which we were talking about earlier, like, you know, if you are measuring what you've been able to do outside of God by, you know, kind of how successful you are, that's the wrong measure. Because if you were working and operating in God, you have no idea what could be done. Like God will constantly blow your mind with how he's able to move with what you know, with your yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is something else. You kind of mentioned like, you know, people saying like, you know, they felt God told them to pray for this thing and they got it. And then this book talking about just, you know, circling prayers and saying it over and over. And I think, again, they really highlight practicality. And one of the things he said, you know, he had a vision for his building, getting money to pay off one of their church buildings. And he said, there were certainly weeks and months when I failed to even think or pray about the promise, but I circled that $2 million promise off and on for about 4 years. And so practically speaking, like sometimes for me, I know I'm like, oh man, I stopped praying for that thing, or I'm not praying as diligently about it as I was years ago. But that doesn't negate the fact that it's a promise, a prayer that you're standing on, and something you're believing God for, just because you don't pray for it 24/7, 7 days a week. And so I thought that was a really practical example that he talked about in the book. That's always so important to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's true. Like, you know, when we don't give God the opportunity to kind of demonstrate just the greatness of who he is and what he can do in our life, we're really like limiting not just God, but ourselves, and where God could grow us and what God could have for us. I think, you know, when I was reading, what's crazy, maybe I'm just super, maybe it's that time of the month, or like I'm super emotional because of all of the things that are happening in life. But when I was reading part one, I was tearful, just like seeing how either how much faith was being put in God, and the examples that he was providing about how God then moved. And it made me think a lot about even us in kind of saying, like, we know that God for us has demonstrated how helpful having a sense of community and sisterhood is around developing a relationship with him. And it's like, oh, why wouldn't we open this up? This, you know, and this seems like the prime time. And I think both of us were kind of like, oh, but it's kind of fun just doing it between the two of us. Like, we're fine. And the other girlfriends that join us too. But then saying, like, God could have something greater here in terms of an allowance, again, for him to get the glory. And that can be scary because it's like, as much as we want to win souls, like that is our objective numero uno. Like, we want to win souls for God, and we do it in moving around in our daily lives, but kind of blowing it up on this larger scale will allow God to get the glory, but it also becomes super scary and real, just for how big God can or has the potential to be.
Yeah. Something else, talking about getting a little teary-eyed or feeling like this just smacked me right in the face. He talks about how sometimes we try to manufacture the miracle for God.
Girl, yeah.
When we try to do God's job for him, it does backfire. And I was like, ooh, don't be judging me.
It's like, you don't know me, get out my life, Mark.
Right. He said, you know, if we repent, God always recycles our mistakes. And I think sometimes, and he also talks about, sometimes we are seeking answers, but we really need to just be seeking God and like take our hands off of stuff. It's like, okay, God, you told me I'm gonna get this. Can I get a tracking number on that blessing?
Right.
You know, but and when we don't, we try to like fix things, and sometimes we just have to just step back and let God be God. Thank him and praise him in advance.
Yes.
If he told you this was gonna be, just get out the way.
Right.
Again, we see the end result of people's prayers and things, and we have to get to the end result of ours and remind ourselves that there are some things that we have prayed for and God has come through. And when we are waiting on other things, we need to really call those things into memory, because the wait can be hard, you know, and we see like people waiting for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. We see the end of that, but imagine what it was like for them in that. I couldn't imagine waiting for something for 30 years. In year 15, I would be like, you know, we see how Abraham tried to help God. Like, you know, if the promise is the promise, it's going to come when God wants it. So like every time we try to help God, it backfires. And so that I was just like, you're right.
Right. And like you said, like the one thing that kind of shook me was, I think he talks about this character, Hani, who, you know, draws circles, and asks this question, like, could one really wait for 70 years for the manifestation of what they've asked God for? And I was like, 70 years? Like,
right?
Lord, that seems unimaginable.
That promise ain't for me if it's
right. It's like, maybe I misheard you, because 70 years, I'd be knocking on like 133. So, you know, what does that look, or 103? So, but I think it was like, it really was helpful to say, like, how long are you willing to wait for God's promise? And I love the fact that you brought up Abraham and, you know, the Isaac blessing versus the Ishmael, like, right? Like, if I know that what God has promised is going to be 10, 15, and when he talks about multiplication, 30, 60, 100 times better than what I'm bringing or what I could imagine, then why would I settle for 15? But I think what's so hard is we don't know that. And I think about how we can really document for ourselves, not just have the word, not just have the Bible as our documentation, because sometimes I think it is hard to imagine kind of live, this as a lived document, but even though it is,
yeah.
But one of the things that I've started to do is, I know we keep prayer requests and we keep track of when those prayer requests are answered.
Mm-hmm.
But what I also want to keep track of are the things that I'm grateful for that I can easily forget when I am in situations that are overwhelming or that I don't see a way out of. Because the reality is, like you said, God has come through time and time and time again, and he will. Mm-hmm. And while I wait, I need to be reminded of that.
Yeah. And he also talks about how this idea of living this way, it comes with like a level of letting go of control.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to let go of control of our timelines, of our expectations of certain things, because again, every time we try to help God, it backfires. And it's like you said, we know the promises of God, what he has for us. And I know for me personally, I'm just like, when are you gonna stop accepting raggedy mess? And
raggedy,
like, God already told you, like, but you're gonna take this you're gonna take this little piece when I told you the whole meal is coming if you just, wait on God. And we know that it backfires. And so I think, to your point, it is so important to document what we're grateful for, document answered prayers, document when things turned out way better than you even, in a way you didn't even think about it, because that is like, that's what it's about. And he said, one of the things he says, that if you want God to surprise you, you have to give up control. You will lose a measure of predictability, but you will begin to see God move in uncontrollable ways.
Right.
And it's like, because we know that God can do way more than we imagine, let it go.
Let it go.
And letting go is hard, but we got to try to do it.
It is. Oh my gosh.
We don't want to don't settle for the raggedy.
Don't settle for the raggedy hot mess. Hot garbage.
Don't settle. Just keep on waiting. Yeah.
And it's hard, but I think that one of the things that is so helpful about this book are the real life examples, are being able to kind of see the process in the waiting. Because I think that's what scares us too, is kind of like, well, what is this waiting period gonna look like? Is it gonna be halfway decent? Like, am I gonna wish I had never asked for what you told me that I could ask for, But I appreciate the examples for sure.
And he even says, like, one bold prayer can accomplish more than 1,000 well-laid plans. And so, like, pray the bold prayer. Let God amaze you. And this goes into the last chapter in this section. The question he asks is, do we think there's a limit to God's power?
Right.
And we should not know. There's no limit to God's power.
Right. And I love how he said, like, the obvious answer is no, but we unintentionally place limits on God's power when we, ask in small ways, or when we try to help God, or when we say that there's no way out of a situation, when there's no way that we could see, but that, completely is nothing against what God could see and did foresee.
Yeah. And I think that is just a question that I want to keep in my forefront, is like, is there a limit to my power? And I think about, my own life, and I think about, when God has removed relationships, and I'm like, okay, God, if you wanted me to be free from this, then I need you to, help me on the path. And time again, God has helped me on a path. And I think this question, is there a limit to your power? There's no limit to your power, guys. So if I'm with this mess or this situation, because I'm walking in with you, I'm gonna need your help. And he comes through. And I think, like, it's hard to remember, especially when things are tough and you're down to the wire, but that's what you got to remember. There is no limit to God.
Right.
And
Right.
pray like you believe it.
That's right.
Pray like you believe that.
And that's what he said. He says, how can you not believe when God has proven himself over and over and over again? And even when we're in the midst of it, sometimes, again, it doesn't always work out the way that we think it should have, but it always works out. And so if we have that in mind and keep that at the forefront, it allows us to see that God ultimately works it out.
Yes. Better.
We don't have to worry.
Better than what we would have thought. Okay.
And oftentimes better than we deserve.
Yes. Okay. That's the word right there. That's listen.
Better than what we deserve.
Gotta remember that God is able.
Yes.
He's able to do it no matter what it looks like. He's able to do that. And I think just getting into the practice of remembering. And you got to do it when you're out of the storm, because it's hard to see when you're in the storm. So when you're out of the storm, you got to write these things down.
Yes.
You can go back to them when times get hard. Because when times get hard, you don't remember nothing. You don't even remember, like, he woke you up this morning. You don't even
right. The simple stuff.
You don't even care about that. So, like, write it down. That time when my bank account was negative $500 something, I got a check in the mail. You know what I mean? Like,
and it didn't charge me overdraft fees.
And I think you charge no fees. Like, you gotta write these things down, because we forget so quickly.
Yeah.
What God has done for us, and you can't do that.
Yeah. I love how he ends this section kind of saying, again, going back to what you're asking for is your dream too big for you, right? And he says it better be, because that will force you to pray circles around it. If you keep circling it in prayer, God will get bigger and bigger until you see your impossible prayer for what it really is, an easy answer for an almighty God. Right? I feel like mic drop right there.
Like, that's the word. Like,
that is the word.
Is God big or are you big? Which one is it? Which one do you want?
Right, because both can't be true.
Yeah.
Either you gonna allow God to be big and work, or you gonna be big.
Yep.
So which is it?
That is it. Like, you gotta humble yourself and like it says, he said, and that was spoke to me in the end too. It says, sometimes the power of prayer is the power to carry on.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it doesn't always change your circumstances, but it gives you the strength to walk through them. When you pray through, the burden is taken off of your shoulders and put on the shoulders of him who carried you to the cross on Calvary. Like, we gotta just, and something else he said that I like too is he said everyone, he was talking about some more examples, and he said everyone has basically a unique way of circling their prayers. So literally sometimes we think that there's like a certain way to do things, and like, yes, this is called the circle maker. Yes, maybe you want to literally circle it, and maybe you want to walk around something 7 or 10 times, but everybody has a unique way of circling their prayers. Because for me, I liked how he said too, like, I'm not praying for this 365 days a year. Sometimes I'm praying for it more. Sometimes I don't look at it for months, but like, everybody has their own unique way of praying circles over the promise that God has for you. And so I would challenge everyone listening or watching today to think about what is the dream that God put in your heart that's like, oh, this is crazy.
Because that's the one.
That's it. Yep, that's
it.
It's not crazy. I hate to break it to you, but it's not bold enough.
That's the one.
If it's not crazy, it's not bold enough. And how are you, in your own unique way, going to circle that prayer every day, or continue to walk through that prayer day after day, year after year, month after month, year after year?
Yeah. That's it. We're going to drop our way in the comments, and we invite you all to do the same. And definitely tune in with us next time, where we will be going through the second circle, which is pray hard.
Yes. All right. Talk to you guys soon. Enjoy.
Bye.